Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Destiny Pharma PLC investor presentation for the interim results for the period ended 30th of June 2021. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply click Q&A, scroll to the bottom, type your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. You'll be notified once they're ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Neil Clark, CEO, and Sean Clayton, CFO of Destiny Pharma. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Neil Clark, Chief Executive, and across the table here is Sean Clayton, our CFO. And we're at the offices of FinCap, our broker in London, and looking forward to running through our interims presentation, which covers the first 6 months financial results and effectively an update, obviously sort of year-to-date activities and looking ahead. So I'll just go through the disclaimer slide. Before we get into the interims, just to remind you on Destiny's strategy, we're looking to focus on bringing forward novel drugs that prevent infections. We have a real focus on novel approaches, as you'll see in our pipeline, targeting the hospital market, so looking for controlled use of those medicines, which we believe helps with compliance and efficacy. And we're developing two platforms, really. We have our in-house XF platforms, which was developed by our founder and chief scientific officer, Dr. Bill Love, but also we've brought in two new technologies under the sort of broader umbrella of the microbiome in the last just over 12 months, and that gives us some diversification, but again, a real focus still on infection prevention. And we're looking to expand, as we've done, through bringing forward assets from our own pipeline, but also in licensing, potentially in the future, I guess M&A, but nothing being looked at the moment. And we're an R&D company, so we still look to find partners for the ultimate commercialisation of our successful assets. And that, obviously, we're heading towards the late stage with two assets heading towards phase 3s, which are the final clinical studies before hopefully product approval and registration as a proper product. So that's obviously an important target for us strategically. And we are looking, though, to build a larger company. We are already in our chosen areas, we believe, world leading, but also we want to build a much bigger company. And we've got a great platform for currently to do that, but there are several opportunities in the future, I'm sure, to build an even bigger company, broader platform, and of course key to shareholders and indeed staff as well, build a valuable company. We have a great support at the moment from existing shareholders, but we want to attract more and deliver value through an increase in share price. But that, of course, will be driven by news and progress we make with the current portfolio. And at a glance, as we say, we have two late-stage assets, NTCDM3 to prevent the recurrence of C. difficile, Clostridioides difficile infections, but also XF73, which is from our XF platform to prevent post-surgical infections caused by Staphylococcus aureus that can reside in the nose of patients going in for surgery. And two different programs from different using different technologies, but both focused on infection prevention, and we believe really well positioned to bring forward new treatments which is needed in both those indications. So the assets are well positioned, great data supporting them. Both have completed phase 2s, which we'll come to, so both are looking ahead now to phase 3s, which is a really exciting place to be. But we also have an earlier pipeline. We have a government-backed or grant-funded COVID-19 program with Sporgen, which is proceeding well this year. More news on that later in the year, and also earlier assets from our XF platform, which are largely funded. The majority of that work is funded by grants, which is a great validation, of course, of the excellence of the science. You don't win grants without submitting detailed applications and then being reviewed by experts in the space. So Destiny's got a great track record of winning grant support. And in terms of cash, which Sean will cover, we have a runway, as we've always said, as we've reported through to sort of the back end of 2022, and but at the same time we're looking to progress our pipeline and push forward. So an interesting time for the company, but a good balance sheet, but also importantly great assets which are summarised here in the pipeline. I don't want to get too repetitive, but you can see in orange are 2 microbiome biotherapeutic assets which came into the company in 2020. NTCDM3 is our most advanced program because we have clarity on the single phase 3 it's required in the US, so it just nudges it ahead of XS73 nasal, which is catching up. But in both cases, we've delivered excellent phase 2 data, when in fact M3, the phase 2 data was delivered before Destiny acquired the asset. But both assets have great phase 2 data, great scientific rationale behind them, and looking ahead towards phase 3s. And that's a pretty unique position for I guess a sort of a relatively small AIM-listed biotechnology company to be in. To have 2 totally differentiated phase 3 assets is a fantastic position to be in, and a great opportunity to deliver significant value. And then the earlier assets, which we won't talk about too much today, good diversification, again, grant support, and our dermal program and small cov are perhaps the most advanced of those programs, and more news on those in the next period. But in terms of coming to the highlights, which are summarised in the interims, and obviously the interims looks back, and it is important, I think, for us to reflect on the great success we've had in the period under review. I know shareholders will obviously be asking questions about looking forward, but let's not forget the great track record that Destiny has since its IPO, albeit we may have been slow in some cases than we predicted, but we've delivered great data from what was our lead program, the XS73 nasal gel for the prevention of post-surgical infections. Stunning phase 2 data, great statistical significance. Further analysis has just continued to support the quality of that data. Of course, now what we need to do is to finalise phase 3 designs and take it towards that final test. But that's a real success for a biotechnology company. I go back to the IPO, which going around London in the autumn, it was pretty much 4 years ago. We closed on September the 4th, 2017. We set out then a story to deliver that phase 2, and we've done that successfully. So that's a real success for us, I think, as a biotechnology company. But now, of course, we have this other high-quality asset, M3, and again, we made good progress there. It's sort of quietly going through the very complicated process of setting up manufacturing and preparing for phase 3s. Perhaps not too exciting from an investor's point of view in terms of news flow, but vital when you're looking at phase 3 assets to have a robust, scaled-up process. Also, increasing opportunities for intellectual property and also cost of goods. And across the board, we have a very good approach to making sure we have a very competitive cost of goods, which of course gives us flexibility in the ultimate pricing of our drugs, hopefully when they come to market. And the earlier pipeline progressing well, as we said, and we won a couple of further grants during the year, which is great to help support some of that earlier work. And then Sean, perhaps hand over to you for the financials.
Thanks, Neil. So just quickly, just covering off the financials for the period as Neil outlined. So we continue to have a very robust balance sheet at the end of June, over 10 million assets, net assets, and just over 7 million in cash. So we're remaining in a good position from a cash point of view for a company of our size and development stage, and that cash continues to fund the company through to the latter part of 2022, as we've already mentioned. Majority of spend, as you'd expect, during the 6 months was primarily R&D. And if you could show the next slide, Neil. Just drilling down into that a little bit more on the next slide. Yeah, thanks. In terms of the P&L, so 3 million loss we are reporting for the first 6 months of the current financial year, which is comparable to last year. The R&D spend was a little bit less than the comparative period, primarily because we completed the phase 2B nasal study recruitment by the end of 2020, so there was less spend on that particular program in the first 6 months of this year, albeit that was offset to some degree by the commencement of the M3 R&D program. So broadly comparable in terms of R&D spend. We did invest in the first 6 months of this year in increasing headcount to support our programs and also to help with business development. And so you'll see that we increased our overheads by around 50%, albeit from a relatively low base anyway, as we've invested in people and business development activity. Let me just get the next slide. Thanks. And then just finish on the balance sheet, as I've already mentioned, we had a strong balance sheet at the period end. Our cash burn was around 2.7 million during the period, and that was helped by an R&D tax credit for around 1.1 million. And as I already mentioned, we're in a good position to continue developing our programs and have good cash runway as we look to seek partners and clarify our regulatory position in respect to our phase 3 studies.
Thanks, Sean. So the presentation now, to be honest, may be largely familiar because these slides talk through the 2 main assets and touch on the earlier programs. But try and pick up some themes from this, because many would have heard this before. But just talking here around NT-CDM3, and the NT stands for non-toxigenic Clostridioides difficile M3. So this is a naturally occurring strain of this bacteria, which is being harnessed to deliver a treatment to drive out the toxic strains of C. diff, in a very sort of simple summary. And C. diff infections and the recurrence of these infections is a major problem in the US, especially, as you see, 500,000 cases of CDI reported in the US, and estimates of 1 million in the US and Europe, and leading to many deaths, and it's a significant healthcare cost. And what you can see from the sort of the steps in the arrow is that not only is the initial infection, of course, a problem, but it's the recurrence of cheap antibiotics can sort of kill off that toxic bacteria, but you do get high recurrence rates, and some of this recurrence, or majority of the recurrence, is due to a sort of disrupted gut microbiome in the colon, where the antibiotics actually cause disruptions to that sort of environment, and the toxic strains are opportunistic and flourish. And what we're looking to do here with M3 is to introduce sort of a safe, naturally occurring ground cover to stop this cycle of recurrence, which can lead to very severe episodes. We're talking about 10 or more episodes of diarrhea a day, often in patients, elderly, frail patients who have other healthcare problems, and a very nasty infection. The last thing you want if you're in hospital or a care home for other reasons is to have suddenly a gut infection that causes irritation, inflammation, and obviously very nasty diarrhea, and of course cross-infection. It's very easily transferred. So CDI is well established as a problem, and NT-CDM3 is this naturally occurring spore which has got great phase 2 data, which can, we believe, offer a breakthrough treatment as acting as a sort of safe ground cover, protecting the toxic strains and the damage they can cause to the colon and the patient's health. So the science is well established from the work of Chicago-based Professor Dale Goerding, who's sort of key consultant to us in the program, and we were able to bring this asset in, as you may know, last year, and we're progressing that this year through its scale-up manufacturing and planning the detailed phase 3, but it's a single phase 3 that we need to carry out. And I think we've got to be clear. Currently we don't have the funding to start and finish that phase 3. That's something that we're looking to do. We won't be able to start the study until sort of second half of next year anyway. But partners, co-development, and indeed potentially equity financing as well is the various routes we can go. A fairly normal biotechnology strategy regarding funding late-stage clinical studies. But it's a high-quality problem to have. Based on high quality data with a great asset. So we're really continually impressed with the quality of the asset we've acquired in M3. As we said before, great phase 2 data. If we can replicate this data in phase 3, we're very confident we have a class leading product that will find its space in the market and can deliver very good commercial opportunity. But that's backed up, of course, by the clear clinical need. If we can deliver a rate of recurrence of only 5% with these recurring episodes of CDI after the initial infection, that's a fantastic improvement on anything currently in development. Of course, this also has the advantages of being relatively low cost, easy to make, very stable tablet, and very safe as it's naturally occurring. So, a great asset. And one thing that's happened recently, which we referred to in the text of the interims, is that we've undertaken very detailed, high quality market research in the US and Europe. Talking again, and we have done this before, talking to doctors, pharmacists, even payers in hospitals who basically control how drugs are used, and tested the profile of NT-CDM3 against current competitors, and also just what the market need is. And we've had very, very good feedback, which is really supports again our belief in the programme, encouraging in terms of the understanding of what we're trying to do and the support, and also some very positive feedback on potential pricing, which again gives us confidence that this product, if we can deliver the data, will find its space in the market, and we believe there's a very attractive commercial return. But importantly, or more importantly, of course, a better treatment for patients to stop this cycle of recurrence. And you know, the deaths, in fact, that can often happen, 29,000 deaths a year in America from CDI. And yeah, benefits of patients, obviously pretty clear, and for payers as well, of course, as we're all learning and have learned the hard way perhaps, you know, through the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, you know, infections are costly, obviously damaging to patients' health, but there's a huge financial impact across all hospital infections in terms of delays in procedures, managing the infection, cross-contamination. You know, this is the backdrop to everything that Destiny's trying to do with our 2 lead programs, preventing infections. If people don't understand now the need to you know, prevention is better than cure, and this is exactly where we're positioned. That you know, I think this is our opportunity, and we're picking this up in discussions we're having with potential partners and also with investors as well. There's a real understanding of the cost benefit of preventing infections in the first place before we end up into this cycle of then trying to treat outbreaks and manage the healthcare and financial costs. So it's a theme across Excess 73 as well, but again, very clearly exemplified with M3. So Excess 73, and apologies for the grisly pictures for those of you having a late breakfast, but as we've said before, you know, this is Staphylococcus aureus, lives on us, in us. The nose actually is an environment they like as well. So a third of the world, broadly speaking, are carriers in the nose of Staph aureus, and if you are, you have a greater risk of a post-surgical infection. You know, quite simply, the bacteria in the period of risk when you're cut open can jump from your nose into the wound, and they will happily replicate, produce toxins, and before you know it, you know, it's not common. It's still relatively rare, but when it happens, it has a significant impact on patient recovery. You can imagine if you had a hip implant, you suddenly have an infection associated with the implant. You know, the costs and the healthcare damage are very, very serious. And also in terms of just other procedures, you know, obviously oncology and tumor surgery. If people pick up infections after such surgery, it delays them having further treatments, radiotherapy, chemotherapy. So, you know, managing the infection, preventing these infections from occurring, you know, really has a broader impact into healthcare across all types of procedures. So again, Excess 73, as we've said since for many years, but especially in the last 4 years as a listed company, is very well positioned. There's no approved treatment in America, and the old antibiotic that is used in Europe, Japan, and elsewhere, Empiricid, is an old scruffy antibiotic, which this is a much smarter approach coming out of Destiny's own Excess platform with a clear market opportunity and a clear clinical need. And we've delivered, as you know, hopefully very strong phase 2 data earlier this year with Excess 73, and are now moving forward, looking to finalise phase 3 study designs. And again, in the interim, you'll see that we, you know, it's a major piece of work. We've submitted scientific advice or asked for scientific advice by submitting a package of data to EMA, the European Authority. We'll get feedback over the next few months from them, and at the same time, we're also having discussions with the FDA. So what we want to do with Excess 73, again, we'll come to it, but we had excellent phase 2 data, but obviously now looking forward, what we need to do is to clarify the phase 3 designs. Is there a separate European, separate US approach? Is there potential for a combined Europe-US study? And we'll see. We'll come back and obviously update markets as soon as we get clarity on those discussions. But that's obviously very important for us in terms of understanding the cost, timing, size of those studies as we move forward. But again, I say it's a great position to be in, to be discussing such issues in terms of phase 3 design. That you only do that if you've got very strong phase 2 data, which is exactly what we have. And the phase 2 data, which we've come to, the study was a placebo comparator, 124 patients, but it was a microbiological study in terms of we were measuring sort of before, during, and after levels of Staph aureus in the nose. And obviously what you're looking to do with XF73 is to show that it clearly eliminates, kills the vast majority, if not all, of the staph in the nose from the period of risk. If you do that, of course, you reduce the chances of an infection, a wound infection, being caused by the carriage, the nasal carriage of Staphylococcus aureus. And this was the study design and the results, and you'll see in the orange line, again, this is data that was announced in March. The orange line is the placebo arm, and the blue line is XF73 patients. The red or orangey sort of stars there are the 4 doses given 24 hours before surgery. And you can see patients entering surgery on XF73 basically have, sort of 99% of their Staphylococcus aureus removed, killed. You never kill everything. There are sort of 50 billion bugs, viruses all over us, each of us. But what we're doing here is eliminating the vast majority. And fantastic data yet again from XF73, clearly differentiated, obviously, from placebo. There is a small placebo effect, which we discussed. And the next study shows this in terms of the blue bars with before and after again. You can see what happens with the black line, horizontal line in the middle there. The vast majority of XF73 patients really sort of below the line, and a great reduction in their levels of carriage of Staph aureus. All patients coming into the study were carriers, and then you see that basically only the patients on XF73 had a meaningful reduction in their levels of carriage. And of course, this means effectively that they went into surgery in a much safer position than the placebo group. So over the years, and now with this phase 2 data, continue to build a great set of data supporting the target profile for TPP for XF73. Very safe and easy to use gel. That's what you do. It's a gel into the nose, lining of the nose to effectively kill the bacteria that are living there. It's very potent in terms of killing all gram-positives, all strains of Staph aureus, and that's really important. But also, and we haven't perhaps talked about too much in this presentation, the threat of antimicrobial resistance, of course, has always been a key driver of the XF platform. The data we published that shows that because it acts so fast, a very novel mechanism across the bacterial membrane, it's not delivering superbugs, it's not creating resistance. Perhaps difficult to say that you never see that, but definitely it's clearly differentiated from antibiotics and other approaches. Fantastic research data that's been published, and an update paper was published also in 2020. A key benefit of XF73, it does address this global threat of AMR, and easy to use, very stable, low cost. There's a really good target profile, but of course the phase 2 is really all about efficacy, so it's great having these other attributes, but the fact is it has to deliver what it says on the tin, which is killing bacteria, which is what it did. And and in summary, I think we've covered this. It's really well positioned, and the target product profile tests very well. But obviously, with this phase 2 data now looking forward, what we need to do is to clarify phase 3 plans. We've done previous work and market analysis showing that for patients it's very easy to use. The current alternative, mupirocin, is really supposed to be given twice a day, 5 days before surgery, whereas this can be done in just a dose of the day before surgery. I said it's very, very easy to use. It's not an irritant, and very comfortable in the nose, and does what it says and kills the Staphylococcus aureus for the period of risk, which is the period the patient's cut open. But also, as we've seen in the secondary data, for several days afterwards as well, the XF73 continues to keep those levels of staph in the nose very, very low, so less chance of post-surgical infections. And for the hospital, of course, less hospital infections means faster patient throughput, healthier patients, lower costs, less potential for outbreaks, of course, of MRSA outbreaks in hospitals, which can shut down hospital wards. Hospitals in the US are ranked and assessed on the levels of hospital infections, and of course, for private groups and indeed public groups, it affects financials and profitability, where that's important. So, a key part in the whole process of running a safe, healthy hospital is to eliminate as much of the hospital infections as possible. And XF73 and nasal decolonization is well established as a key component in that whole process, alongside all sorts of other hospital cleaning and PPE, etc., etc. So in terms of other activities in Destiny, since the IPO, of course, we've had our China partner, China Medical Systems, who are an investor but also have rights in China to the XF platform, and continue to have very good relations with them. They've supported us in grant activity. We've been doing our own work in microbiology as well in China, and we've in-licensed, of course, the M3 asset last year and our partnership with Sporgen. Looking forward, of course, partnering for our lead assets is a key target for us. It's very difficult to promise and predict when deals will happen, but it's fair to say that we do have activity. We have interest and people in data rooms. We'll see where that goes, but that's a key part of our strategy, and we'll continue to network and talk to potential partners. As I said, grant funding programs progressing. Perhaps the dermal program and sport cover the ones that perhaps are more advanced of those programs. But again, you get validation from winning these grants, especially when they're the larger grants, such as SportCov and the UK China AMR Fund. There's a lot of work goes into preparing, but also the review process. So a real validation across the board of the excellence of Destiny's scientific and development team. In terms of timelines, perhaps we should drop the top line, but we still like to note, and let's not forget, we delivered fantastic results from XF73 earlier this year. But now, of course, the pressure's on us to clarify phase 3 plans, FDA, EMA meetings, as we said. So that will carry on this year. At the same time, there's a lot of work going on regarding progressing M3 towards being able to start phase 3s in terms of manufacturing, tech transfer, scale up, detailed analysis of the clinical study design. Obviously, we have the outline effectively approved the FDA, but it's getting down to the real detail now, and obviously talking to potential CROs to work with us on that study. And then in the dark blue line, of course, we know we have to be open. We are also, of course, to start those phase 3s, we will need to have the ability to fund some or all of the work through a combination of partnering, investors, non-dilutive grants, co-development opportunities. And we have various discussions ongoing, and if and when anything is closed, of course, we will update the markets. But that's a fairly normal set of tasks for CFO, CEO in a biotechnology company to be facing. I guess must stress what's really exciting is that we're talking around phase 3 studies, which is the late stage, closer to the key evaluation point, which is this business is actually getting the product approved and then actually seeing the product sold. And that's the real test and the real validation is what we want to do, is to see our drugs helping patients, but also creating a commercial and an investor return. And obviously lower down timelines there, depending on progress with the funding, obviously starting phase 3s and finishing phase 3s as we look further ahead. And in that timeline, there'll be other great opportunities to develop the pipeline from the current assets, and indeed other opportunities to grow the company. So we're in a very strong position. And let's not forget the great success for XF73 this year. And looking forward, though, it's clear what we have to do. And I think we'll stop the presentation there, and happy to hand back and also address some of the questions that have been raised.
That's absolutely fantastic. Neil, Sean, thank you very much indeed for the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, do please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated in the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you the recording of the presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via our investor dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation is ended, you will be redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the team can better understand your views and expectations. Neil, Sean, perhaps before we move on to some of the questions submitted during the live event today, we have had several pre-submitted questions. And if I may, I'll just read the first one. It does form 3 parts, a couple of which you have covered off in the presentation, but if there's any further colour, that would be fantastic. It reads as follows: congratulations on your hard work and successes so far. Re-XF73 and NTCD M3. When do you expect phase 3 to conclude and results published? Re-other XF formulations, what timetable would you have to have for early phase studies, and how will they be funded? And the third part is refunding further studies. Will you be looking for further capital raises to fund these studies, or license with upfront payments in some way?
Okay, thank you. I think we did really cover those in the presentation. The outline timelines are on the slide that's on the screen now regarding when we could potentially start phase 3s. Again, we have to be a little bit careful in terms of nailing those down to specific quarters within those periods, but that's our sort of targets. But it will depend on how we progress with partnering and obviously finalising the financing of those studies. So not sure I can say too much more. But and in terms of the earlier pipeline, again, we have a great track record led by Bill Love and the team with Sean of applying and winning grants. It's a very competitive process, so definitely some of the earlier work. I'm sure we can continue to win some grant funding and progress those assets as needed. Of course, as they progress towards starting clinical studies, with the dermal program, maybe spoke of, the opportunity then is to perhaps be to look at other opportunities, partnering or equity markets to not be so reliant on grants. Grants are good, but they also can be quite bureaucratic and slow. And of course, the grants only cover, I think, typically say 70% of the costs, isn't it? And the company still has to fund a portion of those. But that's how we look to fund those earlier assets. So hopefully that answers most of those points.
That's fantastic, thank you. The second pre-submitted question we had is, what is your annual target market capture in terms of global dollar sales for M3 and XF73?
Well, we obviously have very detailed analyses. We run our own net present value models. We don't really go public on the detail, but of course our external analysts, actually FinCap and Andy Smith at Equity Development, they run their own analyst notes on potential market sizes. We do talk around both having peak market sales of $1 billion. Now that may sound a bit dreamy, but the fact is it's backed up by some logic in terms of M3. We see the core market for the prevention of recurrence, without being too ambitious, with sensible pricing, peak market sales of $200 million with its core opportunity there. Of course, then there's Europe and the rest of the world, so that could expand up to $500 million. And then there's also another opportunity in primary prevention of C. diff. So again, potentially peak sales of $1 billion with M3, but built up through 200 to 500 is the real core target market for this initial indication. And similarly with XF73, right since the IPO, we've always talked in the US alone about potential peak market sales of $1 billion, built up from just driven by sensible pricing again, but sensible market penetration, but the number of eligible operations in the States, where there's tens of millions, and of course the number of surgical procedures across the world is growing. So you're increasing the market opportunity, because there's still, with patients who are carriers in the nose of Staphylococcus aureus, there's still this increased risk of post-surgical infection, and nasal decolonization is best practice. So those are the target peak sales. To be honest, if we get anywhere close to those, then we'll be in a fantastic position. But definitely we have some ambitious targets, but they're realistic. They're not ridiculous. And I think our analysts, you can read the analyst notes. I think they're accessible through our website. We're not too out of kilter with them. Of course, that's their own independent view. So some great opportunities for both those assets.
Fantastic, thank you. Sean, investors as well have submitted a number of questions during the presentation today. Perhaps if I could just hand back to you just to click on that Q&A tab, and where appropriate to do so, perhaps just starting at the top and working your way through, just read out the question and give your response. That'll be fantastic, thank you. Okay, so we asked a question on what is our position with our anti-COVID nasal spray trial. Well, it's not in a clinical trial. It's a preclinical program, so it's going through research studies. As we outlined in the announcements back in a year ago, when we won the grant with our collaborator Sporgen, it's proceeding well. But when we've got data, we'll announce that. And if that data is good, then of course we'll be in a position to move it towards human studies. So, but more information on that later this year. The next question is a good question. What are the biggest challenges regarding XF73 phase 3 design? Are the FDA and EMA in broad agreement? And then 3 is the partnering environment for anti-infectives generally improving? I think yes. I think the latter question is generally improving. I think it's fair to say that anti-infectives has been unfashionable, so it's not a hot area as rare diseases or immunology, but that doesn't mean that there's opportunities. There are opportunities for us in that space, and there are
there is increased interest both from partners and we believe from investors as well. Challenges regarding phase 3 design, well, the challenges always are, first of all, the regulators reviewing the data we present, phase 2 data, also in terms of the actual study designs. I guess the biggest difference perhaps between Europe and America is that in Europe there's, again, though it's not certain, but there's more understanding of using microbiological endpoints, which means you basically, you can take swabs in our case and you can show is the bacteria there or not, whereas perhaps the FDA likes to see more clinical evidence, which in the case of XO73 would be showing that there's actually less infection. So that the infection course would be coming from a doctor or clinician saying, well, that wound is infected, and there are differences in approach, which can lead to larger study sizes in America, more expensive. So these are discussions we'll have with regulators. But overall, the challenges in anti-infectives are there's other more detailed issues such as non-inferiority or superiority, and as you get into the complications of the statistics, your comparators, as with any clinical design, gets very complicated. But I think that the simple challenges for XO73 are more regarding the endpoint of microbiology versus clinical endpoint, which is something that we obviously submitted to the EMA for scientific advice and on ongoing discussions with the FDA. And then here we have a question regarding the Amr Action Fund, which is a fund we're aware of. And this is interesting actually, because this is over a year old now, and as it says, AMR, it's the Antimicrobial Resistance Action Fund. It's a fund which is, it's got its own website and has made press releases, and it's looking, or has raised over $1 billion to invest in clinical development that addresses the global threat of antimicrobial resistance. So obviously we're aware of this, and it's a fund that they're aware of us, and we'll make contact with them. I think it's fair to say that they haven't invested yet, haven't made an investment, and we obviously watch what they do with great interest, as do others in our sector. But it's a great initiative. And why has this been done by Big Pharma? Because of course they can see the need for better drugs in this space, and it'll be very interesting to see how the fund invests and how it develops. But we're aware of Dr. Skinner, but also Dr. John Rex as well. We're both, John Rex has been very active in this whole area for many years, and Bill has had previous contact with him. So we're aware of them, they're aware of us, and we'll see where things go. And I'm not sure Sajid Javid would necessarily want to get associated with a pharma investment fund, but all help. There's definitely certain politicians and government groups do show interest in supporting initiatives in AMR. We see that through grant support. So you may recall that we have, with our help of our Chinese investor, we have won a £1.6 million grant under a UK-China government AMR initiative. So it's always worth lobbying where we can. But I'll let you contact your own MP. That's rather than we have our own connections. The M3 landscape. Oh, sorry, what's happened there? Sorry, I lost screen there. So the M3 landscape. So yes, there is some competition in this space, and the reason there's competition is because there's a clinical need and it's a very attractive commercial opportunity. So there's no surprise there's competition. We believe, and we've looked at this closely, of course, before we acquired rights, or we acquired NTCDM3, but we believe that it's very exquisite in the way it's differentiated from the competition. It's not extracted from fecal matter. It's not a fecal matter approach. It's not a consortia of bacteria. It's a single spore, which is non-toxic C. difficile, which effectively stops the toxic strains from surviving and proliferating. It's a very neat, targeted solution, and we believe it has clear advantages, be it cost of goods, safety, efficacy compared to the other competitors. And obviously, what we need to do is to show that through the phase 3 study that we want to do. But the work we've done, as I said, at market research, we believe that it has a very attractive space despite the competition. And as the next question refers to some of the companies, pharma, that have either developing vaccines, I think there's only 1 or 2 potential vaccines for C. diff. There's also been some, I think, that have failed in the past. Not a problem. Again, shows it's a very attractive market. We're not sure that vaccines necessarily are the right approach. Vaccines don't necessarily work sometimes in elderly, frail patients whose immune systems may not be as strong as others. And again, this is a very, the NTCD M3 approach, a solid dose, simple pill, a glass of water for 7 days, is a very simple solution, which we believe could be, again, very cost effective. So some competition potentially coming down the track, but again, we see that NTCD M3 has its own space. And again, we don't assume 100% market domination in our market models, and we still have a very attractive opportunity. There's a question here on partnering. I'm not sure that we specifically mentioned Exit 73, but definitely we have interest for both our lead assets for potential partners. And obviously, if and when those discussions are closed, we will make announcements. But it's a key part of our strategy to find partners, because we are not a company that says we're going to commercialise the assets ourselves. We're a research and development company. So obviously, to get access to the market, we need to have a commercial partner. So that's something that we're continuing to move forward. And I think it is fair to say that M3 is further advanced and has that clarity of, we know pretty much what we know what the phase 3 study is. It's a single phase 3. So that means we know the cost of that phase 3, and of course the partners, that clarity is attractive. So I think it's fair to say that M3 is more advanced in terms of it as a program, and that means it does lead through to more interest from partners, because they can get their heads around exactly what's required to get that final phase 3 done. And if the data is successful, then of course they can look at the commercial opportunity. And Exit 73, we're catching up, but it will take a few months before we're in the same pace with Exit 73. So hopefully in a few months' time they'll be neck and neck, and we'll have 2 assets which we have that clarity. But definitely, there is interest in the assets, and obviously we want to close deals, but no guarantees can be given if and when that will happen. It's a complicated process. Yeah, I think we've covered timings for phase 3s, and it's difficult to say too much, but obviously we definitely want to start one or not both phase 3s next year. But obviously it's going to be towards the second half of next year. We're not pretending that we can rush to start in the first half, but we'll give further updates in due course. But for Exit 73, obviously we need to have feedback from the regulators before we can be firmer on when we can start exactly what we'll be doing. I think there's a question here about design of phase 3 studies. Again, for M3, I mean, there has been other clinical studies run in addressing Clostridioides difficile infection. So there are examples out there which we can learn from, which is good. So in terms of design, I think one of the key aspects of the design for M3 is the analyses of the, effectively it's the feces of the sufferers of infection, sort of before, after, during, and the comparator, placebo comparator study, and just the processing of that. Because of course the accuracy of that data and the tests used are critical, both in terms of diagnosing patients, recruiting them, but then of course the analysis, because effectively the data showing whether or not M3 works or not is going to be extracted from the feces of the patients in the study. Having said that, it's fairly routine. So, I mean, I've worked with a CRO Urban for 8 years. I know how complicated clinical trials are. It's one of the most complicated things you can do. You're working in this case, in hospitals, busy hospitals, where doctors and administrators are having to cope with day-to-day emergencies, let alone running clinical studies. So a very difficult process. But I think in both cases, once we have the designs, the studies are not the most difficult in the world. But I'm sure we'll be, I regret saying that, because once we start, there's all the pressures on recruitment rates and timelines. But our team have shown they can run studies. The broader team has great experience, and we'll be working with expert CROs who know what they're doing. So, I think that the feedback from the regulators is perhaps the most critical part. So we get studies clarified, and then we'll crack on and look to start as soon as we can, again, subject to partnering and funding. I think we've covered other questions after, as we expect, a lot of questions on partnering. We need to be careful what we say there. We're not guaranteed deals, but it is a key part of our strategy. So we're being open in saying that's something we're working very hard at. So that's ongoing, and I think we're confident that from discussions we have that we've got valuable assets that are of interest, and that's a great place to be. So
Fantastic. Neil, Sean, thank you very much for addressing so many questions from investors, and thank you to the investors for sending those in. Of course, if there are any further questions submitted, the company will review all questions submitted today, and we'll publish responses where appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Neil, perhaps I could just ask you for a few final words to wrap up before we redirect investors to give you some feedback.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for their interest and good questions. Obviously, the interims, as I said, looking back, a great success with XS73 Phase 2, good progress on M3. The earlier assets progressing well, but we know it's looking forward. We've got some key challenges which we're looking to address regarding clarifying Phase 3 design for XS73 and clarifying how and with who, in collaboration with who, we're going to fund hopefully both Phase 3s as we look forward to next year. So again, we will obviously come back with updates as and when we have significant news. But again, come back to the point, it's a great position for a company like us to be in. We think we're obviously undervalued. You can look across at some of the American companies working in the senior space, valuations of $500 million and above. And we believe the M3 asset stands in comparison with any of those. And of course, we also have XS73 and other assets. So a lot to do as we look forward, but we're a very good place, and look forward to talking again as we make progress. So thank you.
Fantastic. Neil, Sean, thanks again for updating investors today. Could I ask investors not to close the session, to be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete and is greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Destiny Pharma PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That concludes today's session. Thank you and good morning.